Hi, we're going to keep talking about the book of James, looking kind of at the first chapter. And really, the whole first chapter of James is just an introduction to the rest of the book. There are several themes that he introduces in the first chapter that he's going to be developing and discussing as he continues on through the book. He's talked about trials, and he's talked about accepting them joyfully rather than resentfully. He's talked about making up your mind whose side you're on. He's talked about the temptations of wealth and the dangers of envy. He has talked about a little about resenting God for the situation that we find ourselves in, about blaming God for problems that are actually of our own making. And now in verses 19 and 20, he's going to introduce the issue of anger. The text says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." So let's talk about anger for a while. I'm going to jump out of the book of James, and I'm not going to be talking about what James specifically says about anger, but I'm going to kind of try to develop a broader picture of anger and the problems that it presents and the ways that we might be able to handle one of the more dangerous emotions, anger. So when we talk about anger, I'm really talking about something that I'm pretty much an expert about. And I bet you are too when it comes right down to it. I'm not an expert in knowing how to handle anger in a godly way, but I am pretty much an expert in how to get angry and how to be angry. Anger is just a huge element of human life. I am shocked when I look at Scripture to see how many times anger is mentioned, both of human beings, but also of God. You get in Genesis 4, you start out with Cain being angry that Abel's offering was accepted and his wasn't. And you have in Revelation, at the end of the Bible, then the anger of the nations that are arrayed against God. And in the middle, you have this wide array of the human experience of anger. Abraham's fear that God will be angry with him in Genesis 18. Then you have the fury of God's wrath in judging the earth, Revelation 19. A lot of people are really bothered by the idea that God gets angry, as though it is somehow unworthy of him. Maybe that God is too touchy, or he's too sensitive, or maybe he's even too selfish. He's just offended by the slights of mere human beings. This is the way I wanted it to go. You refuse to give me what I want, and so I'm going to be very angry. Maybe sometimes we worry that God is cruel in killing folks in his wrath for what sometimes seems to us to be very trivial reasons. But I would say two or three things to that. First of all, I am glad that God takes me seriously. If I didn't matter to God at all, surely he would never be angry with me. Anger is a personal emotion about things that truly matter, at least righteous anger is. And I can't believe that God is going to be angry about something that is trivial. I matter, and it matters what I do in God's sight. Secondly, I am glad that God cares enough about injustice that he is angry enough to do something about it. I read a book like The Enigma of Anger, and Garrett Kaiser has a really good insight about this. He says, quote, "The thoroughly gentle God, the unceasingly kind God, the God of the unalterable smile, is also the fairy God, the clown God, the stuffed animal God, perhaps not a great deal more helpful than the threadbare little giraffe that a child clutches in his dark room as he winces with every cry from his battered mother's throat." In other words, the God who is never angry might be able to cry with you, but he is never moved to do anything about actually rescuing you or changing the situation. The God who never gets mad for fear of offending the abused must sooner or later be construed as the God who never gets mad at the abuser. And so you have in Revelation a God of furious anger who avenges his persecuted people. I love the picture in Mark chapter 3. Another time, Jesus went into the synagogue and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand up in front of everyone." Then Jesus asked them, "Which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill?" But they remained silent. He looked around them. He looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. This man, nobody cares. He is just getting in the way of keeping the law. He's an obstruction, someone just to kind of kick out of the way. And Jesus gets angry about that. And you even get a little bit of that in the picture of John 11, where Lazarus has died and the family and his friends are mourning. And Mary falls at Jesus' feet in grief and says, "Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died." And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. Is he deeply moved as though he's consumed by pity or anguish? Maybe. I think rather though he was angry. Some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" And Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. I think, once again, angry. Not at critics or at the mourners. He's angry at Lazarus dying. And Jesus' wrath, the wrath of God, motivates him to step in and to do something about this. Even the cross is about God's wrath and Jesus' anger as much as it is about love and forgiveness. There's this painting by Jose Clemente Orozco. Christ destroys his cross, a defiant Christ with clenched fist. And he chops down the cross that was the means of his own death. And piled in front are idols and armaments that are the cause of so many other deaths. John 19 and verse 30, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Now, I know that John is pointing to the sufficiency of Christ's suffering, but there is an element of anger. There's an element of wrath here too. That's enough, he says. Now, let me suggest to you that this is not merely Jesus saying, "I have suffered enough. Now I can rest." But this is Jesus who is declaring an end to sin's persecution and to the reign of death. Instead of Christ clinging to his life, he gives up his life because that is the only way death is going to be destroyed. That is the only way the power of sin will be broken. So is the darkness of the cross really the sorrow of God, or is it the wrath of God? Now it is clear from the fact that God is angry, that anger is not necessarily sinful, and there are things that we ought to be angry about. Ephesians 4 and verse 26, "In your anger do not sin." Ephesians 4:26 in the ESV says, "Be angry and do not sin." Mostly, though, our experience of anger is just the opposite. It's a destructive display of anger that inspires guilt. That's what we read in James, verse 19. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. You know, most references to anger in Proverbs are about quick-tempered people, folks who get angry quickly and easily, and they act on that anger before their good sense kicks in. Now, most of us know what anger is. We've felt it. It's an emotion. The question is, when does anger arise? Well, when you don't get your way, when you think you've been mistreated, when you wanted something and didn't get it, and it matters to you for various reasons, when you think you've misunderstood in an embarrassing way, when your sense of right and wrong has been violated and it matters to you, when it is personal, then anger kicks in. Paul Hauck, a psychiatrist, in his analysis of anger, kind of lays out this model. He says, number one, I want something. Number two, I didn't get what I wanted and I'm frustrated. And Hauck points out that here we've not yet fallen into anything evil. This is just merely the emotional response to not getting what we'd hoped. But then he says we tend to fall through the sieve. Number three, it is awful and terrible not to get what I want. Number four, you shouldn't frustrate me. I must have my way. Number five, you are bad. You're wicked. You're evil. You're malicious for frustrating me. And number six, bad people ought to be punished. Now, as far as I can tell, Hauck is not a believer. He's just a psychiatrist. But his comment is pretty interesting because here is where murder falls. You know, you can't tell the difference between a murderer and someone who is mistreating someone because they are angry at them. Makes some sense, doesn't it, when Jesus says in Matthew 5 and verse 21, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Racha, is answerable to the court, and anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Here's the key to what I've been saying about anger here. Anger is not the problem. The emotion of anger is not the problem. You can feel something very intensely, and it's completely natural. But it's what you do with anger that is the problem. You can nurse it by holding grudges. You can vent it by blowing up rather than expressing the reasons you're angry. You can eat it instead of confronting and dealing with the problem that's leading you to be angry. You can just simply ignore it. There are a whole host of other reactions that lead to a lot more problems than to problem solving. Here is an example of another model about anger. It's called the non-productive anger cycle. Notice how it begins. There are painful circumstances, something that you don't like. And out of that comes an angry emotion. And then there is an effort to change the environment. Not really solving the problem, but trying to deal with it on a different level, maybe by intimidation, by yelling at someone, by being friendly and being obsequious, being nice, shoving, hitting. Just take your pick. We try to do something about it, but others resist that. They don't play or they strike back. And then there's just increased confusion as opposed to being satisfied or as opposed to simply letting it fall, slide off our back. Just who cares? That didn't work. I don't understand this. I don't know what to do next. I have no new ideas. Here are 5 ways of handling anger. You can suppress anger. You can be openly aggressive. You can be passively aggressive. I know all about that one. You can be assertive, and that's a positive way of handling anger, or you can drop it. Now, think about those. 3 of those are really fairly harmful. Suppressing anger just tends to breed more anger or more hard feelings. Open aggression causes all kinds of problems. Passive aggression, where we try to undermine people and simply be resentful without them knowing about it. Assertive behavior, though, is a positive way of dealing with anger and even dropping it. Now, we're not very comfortable with that idea of dropping it. We think, well, that just means we're suppressing it. But, there are some myths of anger that we have kind of bought into. The first one of them is that unexpressed anger grows in intensity and effect. If we don't say anything, if we don't deal with it, if we don't bring it out in the open, if we don't act on it, then it just continues to grow and control us. That's actually a myth. Actually, unsuppressed anger usually goes away. Not unsuppressed anger, but unexpressed anger usually goes away. It's sort of like love. You neglect love, and what happens? It dies. If you neglect anger, if you forget about it, if you don't worry about it, if you just don't express it and don't bring it up all the time, it dies, just like love, even though anger is a negative emotion. Now, our problem with that is we don't really unexpress our anger. We don't really not express our anger. Our problem is we try to deny that we are angry when actually we really are. We're continuing to nurse anger, but we're just refusing to admit it. So yes, it does grow out of all proportion. But unless you keep it alive by nursing it, I've known people who have gotten divorced. And at first they were incredibly angry at their spouse because their spouse had just been a dog. They had treated them so terribly. And they were just furious at what had gone on. But as time went on, they stopped worrying about the injustices and they stopped worrying about the wrongs that had been done to them. And they didn't constantly bring it up in conversation and they didn't talk about how horribly they were treated all the time. And it kind of faded away. Yes, there were some scars there. And yes, there was pain when they thought about it, but the anger didn't control them. It just kind of took care of itself. Even today, I can tell you a story about something that happened to me in high school. And I can get so angry because that was such an injustice and I was treated so badly and so poorly that when I think about it, I can just almost have a stroke if I sit here and told it to you in all the detail and how I felt and what I believed went on. But most of the time, I don't worry about that and I don't think about that and I don't try to tell people that's my defining story. It's just more or less gone away. Here's a proverb, Proverb 14:29. Whoever is patient has great understanding, but one who is quick-tempered displays folly. Here's another, Proverbs 19:11. A person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. Another myth that we nurture is that talking out anger reduces it. Now, that's true only if you talk to the person you're angry at. If you are trying to solve the problem, if you're trying to deal with the issue that has led you to be angry in the first place, what reduces anger is solving the problem that leads you to be angry in the first place. To talk to anyone else is usually to get more angry. When we talk to someone else, all we can do is talk about how unjust it was and how horrible it was and how dirty that person is that caused us a problem in the first place. I think there's a reason when Jesus in Matthew 5, that passage we've already read, when he says, look, if you're angry at somebody, you might as well have just murdered him. The next thing he says is, if you know somebody has something against you, and I think what he's saying is, if you know somebody is angry with you, or if you are angry with someone else, then even if you're going to worship, then drop it right there and go get reconciled before you come back, because that type of anger is just nursed and it grows. And even if we confess it to God, if we don't do anything to solve the problem, it just gets bigger and bigger. Another myth that we often cherish is that others make you angry. Now, we know that's not true. We choose to be angry. It's our perception of events. It's what significance we give to them that leads to anger. when a baby is crying. Now, in your more irrational moments, you're watching a television show and it's gotten almost to the climax of the show, and suddenly your baby begins to cry, and you may for just a moment feel a burst of anger, but what do you do with it? Oh, a baby is just a baby, and it's our perception of the event that keeps us really from being angry. What happens, though, when your wife comes in and interrupts you right at the end of a show you're really interested in, and suddenly she has some issue she wants to talk about? And I can tell you from experience what happens, and you can probably tell me from your own experience what happens as well. Nagging wife or a critical husband, do you become angry because you perceive her belittling you, or do you ignore his criticisms? Or do you say, look, I'm sorry, it hurts me when you talk to me this way. I'll be glad to discuss this with you, but I will not allow you to abuse me. Now, I know that's a rather healthy marriage, and I'm not at all saying to anybody who's in an abusive situation, you need to just roll over and take it, or even you need to stand up to it and get beaten again. There are times to just leave and walk away. But when we're talking about just those normal everyday experiences of reacting to what we perceive as nagging, or reacting to what we perceive as criticism, how do we finally deal with that? You can respond to people in one of three ways. You can be a child, you can be a parent, and a parent is not a good thing. A parent is trying to force other people to conform to your commands and conform to your ideas. Or you can be an adult. You can handle anger in one of those three ways. As a child, petulant, throwing tantrums, throwing fits, trying to intimidate. You can be a parent, forcing people to be what you want them to be, or what you think they should be, or act how you want them to act, or forcing things to fit into your agenda and your mindset. Or you can be an adult, and you can maturely handle problems and maturely understand people and operate on that basis. Here are 10 tips for taming your anger. I'm just going to lay them out for you. You can make sense out of them as best you can. Number one, take a time out. Just kind of get away, walk away, and calm down. Number two, then once you're calm, express your anger. Number three, get some exercise. Your mental attitude is just going to be better, and your brain is going to work better when you've gotten some exercise. Number four, think before you speak. Don't just react. Get in the habit of thinking before you say something. Number five, identify possible solutions. How can we solve this problem? Number six, stick with I statements. Don't be blaming other people. You caused this problem. You do this. You make me so angry when you. But instead, it's okay to say, look, when you do that, I become very angry. Or I feel intimidated when you. But stick with I statements. Number seven, don't hold a grudge. Turn loose of those resentments. Turn loose of those grudges. Yeah, it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to feel wrong. But don't nurse resentment. Find a way to solve the problem. Number eight, use humor to release tension. Sometimes it's just easier to tell a joke than it is to get angry. Number nine, practice relaxation skills. Learn how to relax. Learn whatever it is. Learn a key word that says you're getting too tense. You need to relax. Calm down, relax. And number 10, know when to seek help. Let the people around you tell you, you've got a real problem here. You need to find somebody to help you solve this problem. You need to deal with this problem. The issue is not being angry. The issue is, how do you handle your anger? And the only way to get over anger is by attacking the problem and solving the problem. Thank you. We're going to get back into James 1 next week, but I just thought it might be helpful to talk a little bit about anger and some of the issues that we run into with anger.